We just come back from the visiting school in Hook Park called Make Lab. So we have just completed the second collaboration there. First time I met Louise was in Taipei in Taiwan last summer, where we sort of put together by organizers of a workshop there that wanted to do projects as collaborations between a set of architects and artists. So Louise is an artist. But we found actually that we have much more in common, and overlap in interest and ways of working than I've ever expected as sort of between architecture and art. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Louise to the AA today. I think that the lecture will be quite applicable to people with a whole range of interests. Just quickly about his background. Luis Rodil-Fernández is an artist, researcher, teacher, and also hacker who taught himself computer programming by cracking computer games as a child. He studied computer science, but dropped out and worked as a software developer, actually living in London. Now he's lived in the Netherlands for almost 10 years, I think.
Even longer, about 14.
Even longer, 14 years. So he's actually more Dutch than me. I've been living in London for the same time. He earned a Bachelor of Arts with honors at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam and a master's degree in music from the Royal Conservatory in The Hague. He's currently a teacher at ArtEZ University of the Arts in Arnhem, the Netherlands, where he teaches critical design at the Interaction Design Department. So please help me in welcoming Louise for this lecture. The title?
Computational Somatics.
Computational Somatics. Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thanks.
Yep.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction and the invitation. This is the first time ever that I'm here, so all this is quite new to me. I see that there's not a lot of people, so at any time, if you want to stop me and ask a question, I'll be very keen on answering directly. I will run a bit through the theoretical precepts that are behind my work, and then I will show you a bit of the things that I do. As Jeroen said, I have a background in computer science and art, and I worked quite a lot with software. I did software for many years, and I continue to use it quite heavily in my own work. And it inspires, so my own work with the computer inspires a lot of the work that I do. I would say that mostly the work that I do is a reaction to this one image. I like to begin my talks with this image. It is perhaps the most boring image that I could possibly find representing a person sitting in front of a computer. It's diagrammatic. It tries to show what the correct way of sitting on a computer is, and I like to open this meditation about technology that I wish to embark you upon. Until not so many years ago, the computer was actually only used by a relatively small number of specialists in a very narrow set of fields. But the person in this picture could be just about any professional practice today. The nurse at the hospital, the graphic designer, the person that sells us the ticket at the cinema. Computers not only have made certain professions obsolete, but have radically changed many professions that, while not yet obsolete, have changed a human to a desk. As computers become the main tool of work of many professional practices today, the body becomes subject to a different definition of performance. The machine places particular demands on the human body, and these demands tax essential aspects of human cognition. As the artist Marco Donnarumma says, machines not only do things for us, they also do things to us. So what does the machine want from us? I would like to show you an example of this device is called the writing ball. It's a precursor to the now defunct typewriter. Anybody here ever used a typewriter? I guess a few. I see a few that could possibly have done it. But the typewriter is basically a machine that even now is more than obsolete. This device was rather clunky. It was hard to write more than a few words without it getting stuck, just like the typewriter was in many ways. And people used it to describe that it was a very frustrating experience. Perhaps the most famous user of this typewriter was Nietzsche, the philosopher, who sick from multiple ailments, saw his capacities being diminished progressively over his life, and adopted this machine as a way to type out his thoughts with less effort than writing longhand. In correspondence with one of his friends, a music composer, the composer said, "Perhaps you will, through this instrument, even take a new idiom," noting that in his own work, his thoughts in music and language often depend on the quality of pen and paper. To this, Nietzsche replied that indeed, our writing equipment takes part in the forming of our thoughts. Kittler says of Nietzsche that though the influence of the writing ball, Nietzsche's prose became quite staccato. It changed from arguments to aphorisms, from thoughts to puns, from rhetoric to telegrammatic style. And the writing ball basically, with all its operating difficulties, made Nietzsche into a laconic. This is the Mobula. The Mobula was a relatively tall machine. So you had to use it either standing, like I'm standing here, or sitting on a tall stool. It had a small screen that allowed you to pre-visualize the frames you were working on, pedals that allowed you to press and cut the film, and various other tools built into the panel that allowed you to work with 3 film spools at the same time. One of the most legendary film editors in Hollywood says of the Mobula that one of the things that I always liked about the Mobula is that you stand up to work, holding the Mobula in a kind of embrace. Editing is a kind of surgery. And have you ever seen a surgeon sitting to perform an operation? Editing is like cooking, and no one ever sits down to the stuff to cook. But most of all, editing is a kind of dance. The finished film is a kind of crystallized dance. And when have you ever seen a dancer sitting down to dance? Walter Murch could be said to be almost a standing desk activist. He promotes the idea that people have to stand up to work and edit films. And he proposes many reasons for that. Both of these machines that I just showed are actually obsolete, and they have converged into the digital computer as we know it. They are both technological objects. And the person in this image is now a typist, a nurse, a graphic designer, an architect, a composer, a VJ, a film editor. He's also writing a novel, a paper. He's an engineer, a doctor. He's all of us, most of us anyway. If you have a smartphone in your pocket right now, this is you too. That's Paul Rand, one of the towering figures of graphic design in the United States. I'm not really an expert in his work, but what I find interesting is that many pictures of his studio were published. And I would like to show you 2 pictures of his studio that were shared with press back in the day. This is a bit what the studio of a graphic designer looked like before the arrival of the digital computer. The pinboard, the drafting table, an area for clean paper, an area for inks and liquid pigments, an area to cut, paste and measure, rules, paperweights. I see in the way that the architects work as well that, the studio practices do not differ so much. The place where you draw is not the same place where you typeset, is not the same place where you ink your screens for printing. The graphic designer of yesteryear had to move back and forth as she switched from one task to another. Move, take a breath, adjust your eyes to a new distance, allow for productive interruptions. The digital computer has eliminated much of this, and it has in fact added distractions into the mix. In many ways, the graphic design studio of today is not that different, but the digital computer has swallowed many of the tools in this studio. The same machine you used to draft is the same machine you used to typeset, to measure, to ink and prepare a design for print. But it is also the same machine you use to Facebook, to hold meetings on Skype, to read the paper, and to check the schedule for the cinema, for example. All of these while your body is collapsed into a single region in your studio space without moving for hours at a time. The Alexander technique is an educational process that helps an individual develop awareness in motion and improve their poise and posture. Many formally trained musicians today receive training in the Alexander technique. Their jobs involve many repetitive micro-movements, and to prevent injury, and aid virtuosity in performance. It helps to hold your instrument correctly without destroying your body. Something that software developers could also learn about. That's Alexander coaching a young student. He once said that the extraordinary development of machinery, which demanded for its successful pursuance that the individual should be subjected to the most harmful systems of automatic training, the standardized part of the machine demands that they tend to stereotype the human machine, the body itself. The power to continue work under such conditions depended upon a process of deterioration of the individual as he was slowly being robbed of the possibility of development. So he had this idea that basically machines encouraging repetitive work were basically, in a way, ruining our consciousness. This inspired his thoughts that in the same way that when a human misuses a machine, the machine eventually breaks down. When a machine misuses the human, it is the human that breaks down. Health systems the world over spend vast amounts of money treating musculoskeletal disorders derived from work. Not to mention, of course, the springing up of gyms all over the place. Wherever there is a high concentration of offices, you are also very likely to find high concentrations of gyms. So you spend 8+, or if you're an architect, I see 16+ hours in front of the computer, and then you spend a few more trying to undo the damage by going to the gym. So in a way, the machine dictates what you do much of your time. This is an image from a book called Physical Computing, published in 2004 by Tommy Gu. It's a representation of how the machine sees you. This is basically what a human looks like to a machine, to a computer. So you have one finger that you basically use to operate the mouse, one eye, you just need two-dimensional vision, and stereo audio. You have no legs, you have no arms. It's a pretty sad creature. Their perspective is as alien to ours. The perspective of the world out there is as alien to ours as they could possibly be. It can't walk, it cannot jump or dance, it cannot sing or scream, it can't make grand sweeping gestures, and it has only one direction in which to look. If we close our laptops and take a good look at ourselves, we know that the full range of expression of which our bodies are capable doesn't even begin to be contained in this alien form that the computer sees in us. The mouse or trackpad, the screen and the speaker were until not long ago the vehicles that the digital computer had to interact with our bodies. VR came and added basically a second eye, something that you could basically represent the arms with, but not a lot more. And VR actually removed plenty even from this picture. For example, awareness of the space around you. But in any case, it's far from representing a human in its full potential. I always say that every innovation in the field of human-computer interaction leaves behind a trail of injured humans. Each one of these innovations is marketed to us as a more natural way of interacting with our devices, a richer experience, it's more user-friendly, but each and every single one of them has, in one way or another, been the source of injuries for many people. Take, for example, the Kinect. Based on technology originally developed by an Israeli company called PrimeSense for military purposes, the Kinect has been used in video game interfaces in the Microsoft Xbox for some years now. And I would like to show you a video. If you search YouTube for Kinect fails, you're likely to find a lot of videos like this. There's a bit of audio, could you please? No, it's HDMI. No, it's HDMI, you cannot control. We tested this before. So as you see, the father and son are basically playing a game in the living room. And at some point, I mean, none of them is aware of what's going on around them. They are looking at a single point in space, just like this single eye that I just showed you. And they are focusing their entire attention on that point. Nothing that goes on around them is part of their awareness. So naturally, accidents like that happen all the time. People keep their cats, they break furniture. These types of accidents are quite common. The image I'm showing you now is Douglas Engelbart's demonstration of the online system, NLS. This was in 1968. And it's affectionately called by geeks as the mother of all demos. Basically, this demo presented window-based interfaces, hypertext, graphics, efficient navigation, teleconferencing, command input, the computer mouse, word processing, dynamic file linking, version control, and collaborative real-time editing. And this was in a single piece of work, in a single demonstration. So many of these things that we continue to consider innovations today, that we see in the latest app or the latest gadget that industry releases, were actually first demonstrated by Engelbart on this particular demo, on this particular piece of work. That's a prototype of the first computer mouse, and that's Doug Engelbart holding it. The next image is quite gross, so if you are not into open surgery, I suggest you look away. This is a surgical procedure known as carpal tunnel release, and it is a last resort treatment for a repetitive strain injury in the wrist, mostly caused by excessive mouse use. And it is more commonly known as mouse wrist. And this is the kind of surgery you have to go through. If you want treatment for it. But the digital computer isn't only an appalling instrument to interface with, it's also a phenomenal attention sink. There's plenty of people staring into their smartphones in the streets of central London, as I've just seen the last few days, navigating narrow alleys, trying to find their ways around the city on digital maps, and doing God knows what else, other than paying attention to what's around them. A healthy human subject in a wakeful state of full awareness is multimodal in state and potential. This means that that person has full awareness of where they are positioned, who is around them, where they're going, and what is the activity that they're currently developing. And the subject, when you are in this state, you can change any of these states at any time, effortlessly, in a natural flow from one modality to the next. In this sense, there are no interruptions, simply because they do not exist. When something else calls for attention, a person in a wakeful state can shift modalities without ever fully abandoning their activity. Only the modality and the subject of engagement change, but the person never abandons full engagement. When the balance in this multimodality is disrupted by overly stimulating one cognitive mode, for example, such as the visual, over another, such as the spatial, you have to focus. This requires an effort. Placing focus on the sense that is being overstimulated drops certain cognitive functions that we have associated with the lower senses. The image that you see there is basically any office in which there is software development going on, and nowadays pretty much graphic design, and anybody who is engaged in heavy computer use for the development of their work. This is a scene that you see pretty much everywhere. The need to focus while you're in front of the machine means that you're completely unaware of everything that is going on around you, and that you effectively have to block it out. People that work like that, like I have for many years, this is a bit how we experience the world. A person that spends much of their day in front of a screen lives in a state of stimulation of their senses that is devoid of variability, improvisation, and intuition. Like the person in this artwork by Lauren Malstaff from 1995. We are shrink-wrapped in a reality where only a fraction of our potentials can be expressed. This state is also riddled with interruptions to the extent that they have to isolate themselves. I'm going to go a bit about the work that I do as a reaction to this. Again, back to this image. I asked many people how they see that relationship. And it was interesting to see that, I mean, the master slave is always there. Some think that it is the computer that is the master. Some think that the computer is the slave. But in any case, that relationship is mostly understood as one of dependency. I'll show you the project that I did for my master's. It's called Braid. The idea behind it, I worked with two dancers that you see, whose names you see over there, Damien Haller and Mudena Ballesteros Parejo. I got interested early on the vestibular system, which is the organ in your inner ear that coordinates the sensation of balance. It is a kind of preprocessor to the brain that basically takes in information from your joints, your hearing system, and your position in space to determine exactly how you feel inside of a place, how you feel gravity, basically. This is a bit how it works. As you move your head with respect to the vector of gravity, the vestibular organ has these little sensor-like hairs that, depending on the direction of stimulation, let your body know its position in space. Each nerve in your system can only respond to a stimuli in a very specific way. Therefore, our knowledge of the world reflects the structure of our nervous system. Your ears, for example, cannot respond to photons, just in the same way that your eyes cannot respond to changes in air pressure. So your nerves expect a stimuli in very, very specific ways. So what I learned is that basically you can simulate these ways. You can pump virtual signals into your nervous system in order to simulate a sensation of balance in the case of vestibular sensation. So this is the position where this organ is. It's just behind your ear in your mastoid process, just the bit of the skull that is just behind your ear. It's about 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters in. And what I discovered through research is that it responds to electrical stimuli. Alessandro Volta actually discovered this. One of the first things that he did when he discovered the battery was a number of experiments on his own body. One of the first things he did was to actually plug the electrodes of the battery directly to his head. And there is an entry in his logbook that says that he felt nauseous and fell to the floor. The technique has been known for many years, actually, and it was later developed by an Italian doctor to treat diseases such as Meniere's disease. So with that information, I went and I built this little machine that you see over there. It looks like a bit retro, like 80s electronics. I used simple maker tools that are available to anybody today that you can buy quite cheaply. There is an Arduino inside. You might have heard of that. It's basically a $20 microcontroller, small computer. And following some indications from my advisor, I built this little device. I started using it by myself in the studio, and I did little experiments. Very, very simple, such as draw a parallel, a line on the floor that is parallel to another one. And I did this for months in these simple experiments to try and understand what the effect was. And what the effect in the body is and how I could work with it. What you see on the left is basically me tracing this parallel line without any kind of stimulation. And what you see on the right is me tracing this line with this machine attached to me, programmed in a random fashion. The second felt like quite a heavy job, actually. It took several minutes to complete something that should be a pretty easy job. And this image is made by simply tracking a spot in my head. So as you can see, I moved quite differently. I had to take a rest, I had to put my elbow out, I had to basically perform a number of physical actions that I wouldn't have to typically do for that job. It's a bit like trying to do it like when you're really, really drunk, but electronically so. When I developed this system to the extent that I could work with other people and that it was safe enough or interesting enough, I decided that I wanted to work with dancers. I figured that if you have to mess with something, you might as well mess with something beautiful. Dancers having complete control over their bodies, I figured that I would like to try and work with that and see in which ways I could interfere with it. What you're going to see now is a short video of Demian trying it for the first time. Using turns. Yes? Is that how you normally turn, or?
For me, it's funny. Actually, I did it once. Now I saw it, and actually, when you are there and you are manipulating him, I couldn't feel it, but I couldn't see myself.
It's just hard. Yeah, it's hard to like kind of feel. Oh, this is the device bringing me out of possession.
Yeah.
Because anyway, I spin already, so I anyway need to balance me out.
Would you like to try that?
Yeah.
Then when you're ready. Okay?
Try now without...
Try without. This is now reset to 0. I'm not doing anything. Try the same thing now.
It's amazing because it's like not very, I don't feel it very conscious.
No.
It's just more like, oh, I'm not in balance. But it's not like,
That's it.
Yeah.
you know.
So that's a bit how it works. When you are wearing it, you actually don't really feel much. You don't feel a thing. What you do is you feel as if the floor beneath you was moving slightly, as if you were in a boat. But there is nothing, it doesn't feel like a shock of any kind. It's a very, very smooth sensation, and it's felt deep, deep in your body. The sense that this device affects is called proprioception, and is the inner sense by which the body is aware of itself. And it poses a unique problem as an aesthetic sense. Traditionally, aesthetic senses have required a distinction between the object of observation and the position of the observer, basically. Most of the times you observe things that are outside of your own body. This distinction can be made with sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, but with proprioception, the sensation comes from within your body, and the object of observation is the body itself. You cannot really place your attention beyond yourself when you are having proprioceptive sensation. So the research question for me became, could we actually proprioceive somebody else's movement? Could I somehow connect these two people? Could I mediate this sensation and send it over a network, perhaps having these two people separated across somewhere in different locations in the planet? To explore this question, we built a performance that we performed in several places in the Netherlands that looks very much like a life science experiment. It's all based on very simple, very slow movements. while they're wearing this thing. There is a narrative as well that you hear in the back. This is the first show. Or a summary of it. Oh, the video is a bit choppy. In a way, this object becomes an element in the choreography, or basically the choreographer itself. Although in this first show, there was also a series of movements that were choreographed that we later removed. This is the system mounted onto them, and naturally when the performance was finished, a lot of people approached us and asked exactly how that worked or how that felt. And I realized that, just looking at this, have two people perform that on stage is less interesting perhaps for an audience than actually trying it themselves. What the device does is basically increase awareness of your proprioceptive sensation by inducing a malfunction in your body. This malfunction is regulated by a computer controller, and the effect that I seek to have in the people is basically to inhibit and direct movement. Humans are particularly bad at being aware of their own bodies. We only become aware of them when something starts malfunctioning, so when you have a pain somewhere. Even just trying to itch a scratch, oftentimes we don't really have the discursive framework to address our own bodies. We have to tell somebody else where it itches by mere approximation. So we can put a person in the moon, but we cannot really tell exactly where to scratch an itch. This awareness becomes only something that we become, this awareness of our own body is only something that we become aware of when there is a malfunction. I'm going to skip this video because I'm running out of time and I still have some stuff to get through. Based on audience feedback, I basically built the second version of this system. As I said, this master-slave relationship that I see between the human and the machine, I also try to emphasize it and exaggerate it in the materials and the design of the work that I make. This was for a general audience. I built these two neck braces that fix your neck in position, just like that. They don't really let you look sideways or down all that easily. The same electrodes that you saw in the other system are also built into this wearable. That's how it looks from the back. Those are the electronics that are made to look kind of dual-like. I don't like to conceal the electronics in my work. I think that many interaction designers spend a lot of time trying to conceal them. I personally think that they are one of the reasons why we make this work in the first place. So I like to show it. This is a bit how it works. It flashes 3 times to let you know that it's online and receiving data. And it becomes this little parasite in your body that you attach through this wearable. I built a stage to go with it that is mounted on mobile pieces. So it's actually not easy to keep balance in it. You have to work at it. And I constructed what I call a neurophysical game, which is a way of, for me, to set audiences to play with these kinds of sensations. And these sensations being mostly innerly felt in their own bodies. So this technology basically interacts directly with your nervous system. In my work, I always try to avoid screens at all costs. I spend way too many years in front of one, and I think that much of the work that I do is a reaction to that. Some took it to heart, and it looks quite like a dance. And this was just one of the strategies that I've used in my work to try and address this, this relationship between the machine and the human. Another work that I made in collaboration with Tess, Maurizio Martinucci, Daniel Berio, and Panos Tomaras is Plasm. It's based on a paper by Alan Turing entitled The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis. This was also work that he carried out in Bletchley Park while he was part of the effort of the code breakers that helped the Allies win the Second World War. So I guess that not happy with that towering achievement in itself, he also decided to study how cellular patterns, how cells basically arrange to form the spots in the skin of this animal, or the zebra stripes. So how these systems basically self-organize. We built a version of it that runs on on a modern computer. It's a very, very large projection. It's about 5 meters tall, 15 meters wide. Part of the goal of this was to make it look as painterly as possible, so no pixels, try to avoid the effect of looking at a screen, and be able to move around it. And in a way, connect back to the body through these aesthetics of muscle tissue. The piece is generative, it's completely different every time it's run. There is an audio generative piece as well with it that basically depends on the pixel information that is shown on screen. Another work that I did in collaboration with Hervé Hirschel is these notes. We were invited in Dordrecht to a shipyard that has now been reconverted into an art center. This shipyard is full of sculptures everywhere. And we realized that we couldn't possibly, we are mostly media artists, so we don't really do sculptures. We realized that we couldn't possibly compete with the objects that were already in the space, that there was nothing that we could add to this that could grab people's attention more than what was already there. So we decided to use the building itself, that we found quite interesting, its history and its placement. So we made a work that was simultaneously both the biggest artwork in the space and the most invisible as well. We built and mounted these small percussion elements, which are made out of a solenoid, which is a small percussion element that can be computer controlled in each one of the supporting beams in the space. That's a bit how they look. They're rather tiny. When you're there, you barely see them. And what we did was to connect these percuttors basically to data transactions that were connecting back to the stock exchange, to these 10 companies, which are the 10 largest shipyards in the world. In a way, remembering what the original function of this space was. Every time a transaction was made, a sale or a buy on the shares of any of these companies, one of these percussion elements was triggered, creating a kind of metallic cacophony that went all around the building. This is a bit of how it sounds like. What was interesting of this installation, just going to go back. There was a lady that lived just across the road from the space that came in one of the days that the show was still going, and kept asking what that sound was. Apparently, she was reminded of when she was younger, 30 years younger, and the shipyard was still active. And I found that story quite interesting. I'm going to go back a bit to the theoretical precepts, the theoretical ideas behind some of the work. Before the time of Lavoisier, who you see depicted there, chemists used their senses to analyze the matters they worked with. It was not uncommon for a chemist to taste urine and analyze its properties from what was plainly available to the senses. The training of a chemist was a lengthy process involving years of developing literacy of nature through the senses. Gas concentrations would, for example, be determined by factors such as smell or temperature. This education involved a person being sensitized to the point that they could use their bodies to detect all the subtle discernments necessary to pursue chemistry with success. Lavoisier and his contemporaries changed all that by creating instruments, machines, measurements, and perhaps more importantly, a discursive framework by which ideas could be validated. Knowledge gained through the senses came to be regarded as unreliable, arrived at by intuition, and more importantly as non-discursive, given the requisites for precise measurements demanded by the new language of the science of chemistry. The machine began to be seen as a primary means to attain trustworthy scientific knowledge, and technology became the means by which knowledge could transcend the body. Making this kind of knowledge discursive and coming up with symbolic representations of it allowed science to collect data, an activity that scientists are pretty much still obsessed with. Only knowledge that can be acquired rationally is to be trusted. Everything that is based in subjective experience is not reliable. These two columns represent values that have been, in a way, present in our society. But the ones in the left, as we enter the Industrial Revolution, these complex values, this complex of values, the interdependent, the ones that are in the left column began to predominate, sometimes at the expense on the ones of the right. We tend to associate the left with precision, reliability, performance, and professionalism, whereas the right column are aspects that are crucial, or that I think that are crucial to the arts, as variable, intuitive, non-rational, and unreliable. Come the Industrial Revolution, the theories of Taylorism came to dominate the thinking about human performance. The work of Frederick Taylor was instrumental to achieve this goal. Taylorism is the set of theories that conform science-based management, something that continues to shape our society today, in fact. Any of you who has worked in software will know that software developers are also obsessed with metrics of performance in a way that the computer enables us to do, is to exacerbate and trend what existed long before the computer was a thing. This is the work of Gilbreth that developed a photographic technique known as Chrono Psychograph that allowed him to study movement in great detail. He was looking into improving worker performance by eliminating wasteful motion. So as a person makes a hinge, you want to prevent that person from making useless movements. And therefore, it means you have to study those movements, measure them, find ways of representing them, find ways to discuss them. These experiments provided data and hard evidence to support scientific management of manufacturing processes. Gilbreth used to keep a collection of these movements as small wire sculptures. So he had a full archive of all the work that they had done with this photographic technique, but then in material form. So you could basically grab one, lift it, present it to a person, and discuss that particular movement. This is what it takes to make a hinge. This is the movements that you have to do to make a hinge. The development of scientific management was also assisted by a cultural shift towards a conception of time where chronos is dominant, a conception that is still dominant today. Chronos and kairos, these two concepts of time are, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but chronos is time on the tick, as it's called. The kind of time that you can measure with a clock. Whereas kairos is time in a more natural sense, like the cyclic measurement of time through natural phenomena, such as the phases of the moon, the tides, the reproductive cycle of the female, etc. In the kitchen, many of these questions don't have easily quantifiable answers. Because they are not to be measured in ways that can be measured. Data is one of science's obsessions, and humans produce data at rates that are much, much, much higher than we can even imagine or visualize. Today, there are sensors embedded pretty much in many of the things that we interact with daily. Some of you might even have a watch that is currently sampling your body. Your smartphone contains a light sensor, a touchscreen, an accelerometer that tracks movement, a compass sensor, a gyroscope that helps the smartphone know its position in space, a temperature sensor, proximity, blah, blah, blah. These sensors are active at different times to make the interactions with your phone possible. A sensor is basically a number moving through time. What a light sensor would be doing in this room is taking samples at a certain number of milliseconds, taking that particular sample, and that number is that point in time. And as you add samples, you basically get a graph that moves across time. All sensors basically follow this principle. That's what sensor data basically is. There are many processes that produce this kind of number moving across time. It's not just sensors. A lot of data functions like that. This is, for example, market data in algorithmic trading. This is the semantic crash in 2013, I believe. $15 billion worth of value lost in 1 second. And all those are basically transactions that occurred in the period of 1 second. The density of financial data is just mind-boggling. Millions of transactions. This is a visualization made by an American company called Nanex, and these are 45 milliseconds of transactional data that it took the flash crash that occurred in 2011. Another thing with data is, of course, if you are taking a sample every number of milliseconds, that means that everything that happens in between every sample, you don't capture it. You know nothing about it. Data is always either incomplete or imperfect or both. Sometimes that's for technological reasons, sometimes that's for political reasons. On the 24th of August of 2015, the Shanghai Stock Exchange had a massive slump that dragged all the exchanges with it. Researchers trying to figure out what happened requested access to the financial data only to find that the data wasn't available, and no explanation was given to them why. To illustrate the point of missing data, I would ask you, what do you think this is? Is this a main course or a dessert? Incomplete data is problematic because it often leads us to the wrong conclusions. Our cultural bias towards data-centric knowledge acquisition doesn't necessarily lead to better conclusions. Given this list of ingredients, turns out there's this smoked mackerel mousse. It's actually dessert. And no matter how much data you have or is available to you, or how smart algorithms get, some questions are simply just impossible to answer for a machine, at least for now. How do you like your eggs is a question that an algorithm will take a while to answer. Interestingly, when an algorithm is given input in the form that it expects, what it will always do is it will try to process it and return something back. This tactic is actually behind pretty much every hack that I can think of. If you know what the algorithm expects, you give it a faulty input containing some kind of payload, and you can get the algorithm to do pretty much whatever you want. This is a number plate being replaced by a drop statement, which basically erases the database where this number plate is supposed to be stored. So you basically give the algorithm what the algorithm expects, which is a set of letters of a particular dimension in a particular position in the car, but you add a payload to that, and you try to get the system to do what you want. All machines, no matter what their purpose are contrived according to mechanistic codifications of specific task domains, which optimize a particular function. A chainsaw cuts wood fast, but is useless for pretty much anything else. Computer programs are just virtual machines. The same compartmentalization and reductive processes are at work. Representation is the way that we externalize thought. It's the physical form that thought takes. It's something that is up there that you can perceive with your senses and you can manipulate with your body. We use representations all the time to learn, to communicate, to express ourselves. How these representations are mediated and how we consume them and learn from them matters a great deal, actually. The same data represented in two different ways can have a dramatic impact in our understanding of it and in our capacity to communicate the thought that it contains. This is the first graph that I know of. The first time that data was represented as a graph. That's 1786, that's not even that old. And that's the data that that graph represents. Up until that day, basically, if you wanted to present data to the reader or an audience, you would lay the numbers in a table, just like that table. This, for example, is a sheet representing the data of England's trade with Denmark in the 18th century. Data and the way in which data was represented was very concrete. The data and its representation were one and the same thing. Working with this data was difficult. Comparing two countries, for example, meant that you had to go back and forth a few pages, you had to hold numbers in your head, and you had to read them, to be able to read them well, so that you would be able to compare them and contextualize your conclusions. So how we actually present information matters a great deal. We can derive much more information from actually a visualization than we think. Another example of a form of representation would be the periodic table of elements. If you just have them arranged linearly, and as you discover them, there seems to be no correlation, but it's one of the brilliances of this design is that basically highlights the properties of these elements and how metals get together with metals, gases get together with gases in a way that basically is consistent with their nature. Not all representations are visual, some are symbolic. The power of an idea lies mostly in the way in which it's expressed and communicated. You can think many ways of representing numbers, and you can think of numbers actually as user interface design for numerals. It turns out that some interface designs are better than others. The number system, for example, that we got from the Arabs is much more efficient and expressive than the Roman numeral system. And this allowed for a whole set of new ideas to be developed on top of these representations, such as complex arithmetic and modern mathematics. All these representations live in one form or another in what we call media. Some ideas can be laid out in speech, others in song and theater. Print media has been transformative, a transformative carrier of representations, allowing verbal, symbolic, and visual representations to be carried, preserved and disseminated easily and cheaply. The printing press has been one of the most transformative mediums of human thought. All the representations we have seen so far were designed for the medium of print. Powerful media and powerful representations go hand in hand. As media evolved, so did the representations that were possible in it. And so, some forms of representation suit media more appropriately than others. While a visualization on a book's page might do an excellent job at conveying certain kinds of data, it does a poor job at communicating others, such as generative processes or time-based media. A computational medium that is designed with geometry and form in mind might make animating a nightmare. Drawing a 90-degree arc, for example, in Illustrator is a 3 or 4 step process, and a few lines of code in processing, which is a language for declarative programming of generative graphics. But if you need to draw 90,000 arcs, each rotated slightly and animate them, processing might make the job a little easier. A computer is only good at one and one thing only. They were invented to interpret and manipulate symbols. That's it. That's all they do. They do nothing more. These symbols are often numbers. This is perhaps what people mean when they say that computers understand zeros and ones. But while this is true, it is also a gross simplification. Those zeros and ones are what make computers good at symbols. A symbol can be a musical score in a sheet of music, or an MP3 file. They are both representations. They could both be representations of Beethoven's Fifth, while neither of them is exactly what you experience of Beethoven's Fifth. What you experience when you listen to music is the music itself. But what the computer ever holds of it is just a mere representation of it. This special quality of machines means that they are also exceptionally good at manipulating, collecting, and copying data, continuing with a more than 2-century-long tradition of quantifying everything. One would wonder if computational media is actually the right medium to express certain ideas. To this effect, I would like you to show this video.
Shot his mother at close range with a .22 caliber rifle as she lay in bed in her home on the morning of December 14th. Lanza was armed with a Bushmaster XM15E2S, a Glock 10mm handgun, and a SIG Sauer 9mm pistol when he later drove a black 2010 Honda Civic to the school. Officials later also found an Izmash Saiga 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun in the trunk of the vehicle. At around 9:30 a.m., Lanza tried to enter the school, but found the front door locked. He proceeded to shoot through the plate glass window to the right of the lobby doors. In the north hallway of the school, Lanza fired upon Principal Dawn Hochsprung and school psychologist Mary Sherlock. Both were killed. He also fired upon 2 other staff members who survived. At around 9:35 a.m., the Newton Police Department received a 911 call about a shooting at the school. Lanza reportedly entered the main office, but did not see the people hiding inside before proceeding to classrooms 8 and 10. There, Lanza opened fire upon teachers and students. 4 teachers and 20 children were killed in the classrooms. At around 9:39 a.m., the first police officer arrived outside the school. At about 9:40 a.m., Lanza fatally shot himself with the handgun in classroom 10.
What this video just showed was a form of representation of Sandy Hook's massacre. And in a way, it also trivializes what happened there. I find it a bit hard to watch, and I wonder if computer graphics are the right medium to address these questions. These videos are all from a Taiwanese company called Next Animation. This is how they advertise their product. It's called NewsDirect. NewsDirect is a high quality and rapidly produced 3D animated graphics to visually enhance news reports by adding a new dimension to help viewers understand breaking news stories and in-depth features. Our animated news graphics help explain complex, abstract concepts and fill in the gaps of missing video news coverage. Often when a breaking news story happens, there is a demand for visuals. However, camera footage might not always be available. NewsDirect's animated news graphics can fill in the details, accurately reconstructing how the event unfolded based on reports. Moreover, our animated news graphics help simplify complex technical stories into easy-to-understand visuals, making them perfect additions for features about the latest news in technology, medicine, or science. They have a number of videos of this kind, addressing all kinds of gruesome events, especially terrorist events. This is when Mark Zuckerberg presented Facebook Oculus at the Mobile World Congress in 2016. I find it interesting that he's the only one that is not wearing virtual reality goggles. And this is an image that actually Morozov used as a source for these quotes. In the future, only billionaires will be able to afford the right to disconnect. Steve Jobs allegedly didn't let his own children use the iPad for more than 2 hours a day. I think that when it comes to computer interfaces, I call this the mouse age, which is the stone age of interactive systems. If technology could offer stimuli to all of our senses in the same level of sophistication, resolution, detail, and throughput than screens today can offer to our eyes, our interactions with machines could actually contribute to expanding a range of cognitive capabilities that are nowadays numbed by the demands of the mouse age. The poverty of our interfaces is also the poverty of the ideas that we can produce and carry out with them. When the only tool we give our students is an Adobe tool, we are condemning them to a world of uniformity and constraints that are set upon them by software designers far removed from their context. The digital medium brings all the goods that we had with static print, and that's just a single novelty, which is interaction. Interactivity is what accounts for all the perceived benefits of digital media: simulation, visualization, collaboration, communication, non-linearity. These are ways of conversing with our content and manipulating our representations. Perhaps what we would need in order to make this more diverse and less focused on, just numeric representations of things is a Cambric explosion of human-computer interfaces. A broad area of experimentation, including other disciplines, that has as its aim to improve or at least not impair human cognition. Let our bodies move and express their full potential. Most technologies are devised as work enhancers, actually, to make work more efficient, but they're sold to us, to the general public, as leisure enhancers. You might have heard the old narrative of, when this comes to life, we will not have to work anymore. You hear it nowadays with AI. The narrative that AI will save us from work has been around for a very long time. It's not new. Virtuosity and genius are much more than just the acquisition of excellence at a particular skill. They require a kind of knowledge that involves sensitivity and intuition. These are not modes of engagement with the world that the machine encourages. And I think that with that thought, I'd like to leave you. I think I'm just about an hour. No. So, if you have any questions, anything to ask. Thank you.
Was slightly over, so if people have to run away, please do. But otherwise, if you can stay, it would be nice, I think, to have maybe 1 or 2 questions, or 3.
From 4 people.
1 each. Gosha?
I mean, yeah, I can follow up with a question. I was kind of thinking when you were presenting the 2 people with the balance kind of interaction, and you said that when one goes off balance, the other one loses balance as well. Kind of. I was kind of confused about what that was showing.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't clear. Because then you said that what if you could control someone's proprioception, and I wasn't quite clear how that was happening. If you could.
Yeah, so they are basically cross-wired. So the sensation of balance of one, the movement of one affects the sensation of balance of the other. So as you move your spine, basically, because the sensor was placed on top of the head, as you move your spine, it is the other person that feels that movement deep in their body. They feel it right under the feet. And it's a one-to-one translation of that. But they could be placed anywhere physically. So in the video that you showed, they are side to side on the stage. But the system that runs that whole thing permits for that sensation to be mediated, basically.
I have to go to the office though. But thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks. Maybe I can ask you 1 question, because, really, I think it was a great lecture, and it's very hard to summarize. So, but maybe if I try to summarize this, there's a bit of a mixed message about we shouldn't simplify, in a way, the interaction with machines because it's too limiting. So if there would be more sort of multi-sensors connected to our bodies in the way we either connect with devices or with each other, it could be better. But then at the same time, I guess you're also a bit skeptical about the implications of that. It's not necessarily just making the world a nicer place, but it could also make the world a scarier place if we are plugged into devices through our bodies in different ways. So I'm just wondering if I could ask you directly, like, are you, is this correct that you're sort of both positive and negative about these possible futures where humans are more and more connected to this sort of overarching bio-political machine? Or how do you see this? Do you see just we should also protect ourselves from this if it would be in the control of Mark Zuckerberg or other big corporations, or do you see opportunities that this would actually make our lives more pleasant?
Well, what I see is a general trend in general in culture to quantify everything, to bring everything down to symbols, to simplify things. It's not the computer taking over the jobs, it's actually the jobs becoming computational in the sense that we make the jobs computationally tractable by bringing the machine into it. And I don't see this trend changing anytime soon. If anything, I think that the arts, what the arts can bring into this is a little bit of diversity and reinforcing the values that I showed presented in 2 different columns, reinforcing the values on the right so that we find some balance, so that we don't necessarily have to think of machines as something that we're subject to. It's something that we can also use and for expressive potential. And I think that as we wiggle out of this quantified everything, that's where the new potentialities can come. If we continue in this line, in the current line that we're basically letting technology take over every single aspect of our lives, I think that the future will be basically an animation like the one you just saw. A Sandy Hook reenactment on virtual reality with Mark Zuckerberg being the only one walking around in the real world. So I think that this choice is something that we can still make. And I think that the arts, the humanities in general, are basically the key to make this a bit more diverse. Not let tech take over everything.
it's nice also because it might apply to architecture in a way that, for instance, Rem Koolhaas recently said something that when governments are placing such a faith in smart cities and the new initiatives by scientists to understand cities as sort of networks and do all sort of consultancy on how cities should be organized, they're taking a bit away the power of traditionally architects or urban designers or master planners to think about the sort of human qualities of cities, right? He was actually saying the Smart Cities initiative is not necessarily good for cities.
Mhm.
So it's almost, I guess, in a way, the same as you said, artists have a opportunity or maybe even a responsibility to make people aware of the dangers of trusting too much in technology. And maybe architects would have in the same way a similar responsibility to think about how these technologies impact the environment and what your sort of critical role is against that, rather than just sleepwalking along with the tendencies to just automate everything and then suddenly we're somehow stuck in a nightmare, maybe.
I see both attitudes as coexisting, and I think they can live quite happily together. But they need, I mean, one doesn't have to push the other in order to become. You can have data-driven cities, and at the same time allow individuals to express themselves through that data, or express themselves through the technologies that are. You know, cities are basically where technology and humans clash. I like to think of it, and I think that. You know, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can definitely be both. Technology can also be, can also have expressive potential.
Right. Great. So that's a nice positive note. And thanks so much. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.